Hello, and welcome to this sleep story. Have you ever wondered what happens to online games when they're abandoned? In a world where digital realms are as vast and rich as the physical one, what happens when these virtual worlds are abandoned? When the millions of voices that once filled them fall silent, who is left to remember the societies they built, the stories they told, and the love they shared? Enter Dr. Elena Vasquez, a virtual heritage preservationist. Join her in the year 2035 as she journeys into breathtaking, silent worlds, digital ghost towns once teeming with life. In the quiet hum of quantum servers, she is the last explorer, the final pilgrim, and the sole guardian of the memories left behind. What she uncovers is more than just code and pixels. It's the very soul of a lost civilization. If you enjoy this type of content, a like or a subscription is always appreciated. It helps our small corner of the internet grow. I invite you to share your own thoughts in the comments below. Now sit back, get cozy, and enjoy the sleep story. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I am one of the few remaining virtual heritage preservationists in the world. It's a quiet profession, one that most people in 2035 barely understand, but it's work that fills me with a profound sense of purpose and peace. Tonight, like every evening for the past 7 years, I'm preparing to dive into the digital depths of worlds that once teemed with millions of players, but now exist only in the gentle hum of quantum preservation servers. The Heritage Foundation's facility sits 20 stories beneath the New Geneva Cultural District, insulated from the bustling world above by layers of earth and advanced sound-dampening materials. Here, in this sanctuary of soft blue light and whispered air circulation, we maintain the most comprehensive archive of digital worlds ever created. Each server room holds the complete essence of massive online universes, their landscapes, their physics, their weather patterns, and most importantly, the traces of the communities that once called them home. My colleagues often ask why I choose the night shift, why I prefer to explore these quiet digital realms when the rest of the world sleeps. The answer is simple. There's something profoundly beautiful about being the only conscious being wandering through worlds designed for thousands. In those hours between midnight and dawn, when the facility's ambient lighting dins to its softest setting, and the only sounds are the gentle whispers of cooling systems, I become not just a preservationist, but a digital pilgrim in spaces that exist in perfect eternal stillness. Tonight's assignment involves documenting the final sectors of Eternia Online, a fantasy realm that hosted nearly 50 million players before its closure in 2029. The world itself was a masterpiece of procedural generation and human creativity, a realm where ancient forests grew according to realistic botanical algorithms, while player-built cities rose according to the dreams and aspirations of their architects. Even now, 6 years after the last player logged out, the world continues its cycles. Virtual rain falls on empty meadows, digital seasons change the colors of leaves that no one sees, and artificial intelligence maintains the delicate ecosystems exactly as they were designed. As I settle into my preparation routine, I feel the familiar sense of anticipation that comes before each dive. The neural interface technology we use is a far cry from the crude VR headsets of decades past. The Mindstream Mark 7 creates a seamless bridge between consciousness and digital space, one that feels less like wearing technology and more like gently sinking into a warm bath of possibility. The sensation is always calming, a gradual dimming of physical awareness replaced by the crisp clarity of digital perception. My workspace tonight is Preservation Chamber 7, a circular room lined with quantum storage units that hum with the accumulated data of a dozen major virtual worlds. The chamber's walls display a slowly rotating galaxy of light points, each representing an active preservation protocol. Eternia's marker pulses with a soft golden glow, indicating that its world state remains stable and ready for exploration. These visual indicators have become a kind of meditation for me, watching them cycle through their gentle patterns while I perform my pre-dive checklist. The checklist itself is technical and ritualistic. Neural interface calibration, biometric monitoring systems, emergency disconnection protocols, all the standard safety measures that ensure my consciousness can navigate digital space without losing its anchor to the physical world. But beyond the technical requirements, I have my own small rituals. Adjusting the chamber's lighting to its most soothing setting, brewing a cup of chamomile tea that will keep warm in its thermal holder throughout my shift, and taking a few moments to center my thoughts and intentions for the exploration ahead. Tonight feels different, though. This is my final scheduled exploration of Eternia Online. After months of careful documentation, I've mapped nearly every significant location in this vast digital realm, interviewed the AI entities that maintain its systems, and cataloged thousands of player-created artifacts that tell the story of the community that once flourished here. Tonight, I'll be visiting some of the most remote and beautiful locations, places that were known only to the most dedicated explorers during Eternia's active years. There's a melancholy to these final visits, but it's the sweet melancholy of a project nearing completion rather than the sadness of loss. These worlds aren't truly dead. They're preserved in a state of perfect digital stasis, waiting for future generations to discover their beauty and learn from their lessons. In many ways, they're more alive now than they ever were during their active years. Free from the chaos of player conflict, the pressure of commercial success, and the constant updates that often disrupted their natural harmony. The mind stream activation always begins with a sensation like settling into perfectly temperature-controlled water. As the interface establishes its connection with my neural pathways, the physical world doesn't vanish so much as it gently recedes, like watching the shore fade as you swim further into a calm lake. My body remains safely secured in the preservation chamber's bio-support chair, monitored by systems that will maintain my physical health throughout the 8-hour exploration session ahead. The transition into Eternia Online happens gradually, respectfully. First comes the awareness of digital space, a vast sense of possibility that stretches beyond the horizons of physical experience. Then the sensory systems come online, the ability to see light that has never touched actual photons, to feel textures that exist only as mathematical patterns, to hear sounds generated by algorithms designed to create perfect acoustic environments. The neural interface doesn't simply translate these digital experiences into something recognizable. It allows consciousness to experience them directly, as naturally as if they were part of the physical world. Tonight, I've chosen to materialize at the Whispering Overlook, a mountainous region in Eternia's northern territories that was beloved by players who sought solitude and natural beauty. As my digital form stabilizes, I find myself standing on a stone platform carved into the side of a mountain peak, looking out over a valley that stretches to the horizon. The view is breathtaking, even after all these years of preservation. Rolling hills covered in virtual forests, whose leaves shift from deep green to gold, as the world's weather systems create gentle breezes. The silence here is profound, but not empty. It's the silence of a world continuing its natural patterns without interruption. Birds, sophisticated AI entities that follow realistic behavioral patterns, call to each other across the valley. The wind carries the scent of pine trees and mountain air, sensations created by olfactory algorithms so advanced that they trigger the same neural responses as actual smells. In the distance, a waterfall cascades down a cliff face, its sound mixing with the wind to create a natural symphony that has been playing for years with no audience except the occasional preservationist like myself. I activate my documentation systems, beginning the evening's work with a scan of the overlook itself. The neural interface includes specialized tools for preservation work, sensors that can analyze the code structure of digital objects, recorders that capture not just visual and auditory data, but the underlying mathematical relationships that define how this virtual space functions. Tonight's goal is to complete the catalog of what players called hidden gems, locations that were difficult to reach and known only to the most dedicated explorers. The Whispering Overlook earned its name from an acoustic phenomenon in the game's audio engine. The combination of wind patterns and rock formations here creates subtle harmonic resonances that sound almost like voices when you listen carefully. The effect was unintentional, an emergent property of the world's physics simulation. But players discovered it and turned this remote location into a place of pilgrimage. They would come here to listen to the mountain's whispers and share the experience with friends from around the world. As I begin my descent from the overlook, following a narrow path that winds down the mountainside, I'm struck by the level of detail that remains active in this preserved world. Tiny wildflowers nod in the breeze, their colors shifting subtly as the day progresses through its programmed cycle. Small animals, rabbits, birds, insects, continue their behavioral routines, creating a living ecosystem that needs no players to maintain its vitality. The preservation protocols ensure that every algorithm continues running exactly as it did during the world's active years, creating an environment that feels fully alive despite its solitude. The path leads through a grove of trees that players called the Memory Garden. During Eternia's active years, this became an informal memorial space where players would plant virtual trees to commemorate friends who had passed away in the real world. The trees remain, each tagged with metadata that tells its story. Reading these digital inscriptions is always one of the most moving aspects of my work. Seeing how virtual communities created spaces for grief, remembrance, and healing within the context of a fantasy world. Following the mountain path for another 20 minutes of real-time exploration, I arrive at what was once Silverfall City, the largest player-built metropolis in Eternia's northern region. The approach to the city never fails to take my breath away, even after multiple visits. Rising from a valley floor like a crystalline flower, a consortium of player guilds who coordinated their efforts to create something magnificent constructed Silverfall over the course of 3 years. The city's architecture defies simple categorization. It blends elements from multiple Earth cultures with fantastical flourishes that could only exist in a virtual space. Spires twist toward the sky in impossible helical patterns, their surfaces reflecting the golden light of Eternia's dual suns. Bridges span between towers with graceful arcs that seem to float unsupported, held aloft by the game's modified physics engine. Gardens cascade down terraced levels, filled with hybrid plants that were designed by players using the world's botanical creation tools. Walking through Silverfall's empty streets creates a profound sense of temporal displacement. The city was designed to accommodate thousands of simultaneous visitors with wide boulevards, multiple levels of walkways, and numerous gathering spaces where guilds would meet for planning sessions or social events. Now, my footsteps echo alone against the polished stone paths, accompanied only by the sound of fountains that continue their eternal cycles and the gentle chiming of wind sculptures that still respond to the mountain breezes. Each Silverfall building tells a story through its architecture and decoration. The neural interface allows me to access the metadata associated with every structure, revealing the names of their creators, the dates of construction, and often personal messages that builders left embedded in their work. The Guildhall of the Northern Alliance, a massive structure that dominates the city's central plaza, contains detailed records of the political agreements and joint ventures that made Silverfall possible. These digital documents represent a form of history that exists nowhere else, the collaborative agreements and social contracts of virtual communities. The preservation protocols maintain not just the static structures, but also the dynamic systems that brought the city to life. Market stalls still display their wares, virtual goods that were valuable in the context of Eternia's economy, but now serve as artifacts of a particular moment in gaming history. Street lamps illuminate automatically as the day cycle progresses toward evening, their warm light casting familiar shadows even though no players remain to appreciate the ambiance. Magical transportation portals still function, their surfaces shimmering with energy patterns that could whisk travelers to other parts of the world, if anyone were there to use them. I make my way to the city's highest tower, the Observatory of Eternal Skies, a guild of astronomer players who used Eternia's night sky simulation to conduct virtual stargazing sessions, built this structure. The tower's upper levels contain telescopes that still track celestial objects across the game world sky, following algorithmic patterns that simulate realistic astronomical phenomena. From the observatory's balcony, I can see the entire city spread below me, its lights beginning to twinkle as the automated day-night cycle progresses. The view also encompasses the broader landscape beyond Silverfall, forests that stretch to distant mountain ranges, lakes that reflect the sky with perfect digital clarity, and roads that connect to other player settlements scattered across this continent of Eternia. Each of these locations represents months or years of collaborative effort by virtual communities, places where people from around the world came together to build something beautiful in a shared digital space. From my elevated position, I began a comprehensive documentation scan of the entire city. The neural interface's recording systems capture not just visual data, but the underlying code structures that define every element of Silverfall's existence. This information will become part of the Heritage Foundation's permanent archive, ensuring that future researchers can not only see how this virtual city looked, but understand exactly how it functioned as a social and technical achievement. As the digital sun sets over Silverfall, casting long shadows between the empty towers, I'm reminded of why this work matters. These virtual worlds represent some of humanity's most collaborative creative achievements, spaces where millions of people contributed their imagination, effort, and social energy to build something larger than any individual could create alone. Preserving them isn't just about maintaining old games. It's about maintaining records of how human communities can flourish when given the right tools and spaces for collaboration. Descending from the observatory, I make my way toward one of Silverfall's most unique features, the Archive of Echoes, a library constructed by players who wanted to preserve the stories, poems, and creative writings that emerged from their virtual adventures. The archive occupies a building designed in the style of classical Earth libraries, with reading rooms filled with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that adjusts automatically to provide optimal reading conditions. The Archive of Echoes represents one of the most fascinating aspects of virtual world preservation. While the physical structure and its digital books are maintained by the standard preservation protocols, the real treasure lies in the player-generated content that fills its virtual shelves. During Eternia's active years, players could write and publish books within the game world using an advanced text creation system. These books were then distributed to libraries throughout the virtual world, creating a literary ecosystem that paralleled the game's fantasy setting. As I enter the archive's main hall, My footsteps echo softly against marble floors inlaid with intricate geometric patterns. The ceiling soars overhead, supported by columns carved with motifs that blend different cultural traditions from Earth's history. Soft light emanates from crystalline formations embedded in the walls, a lighting system that was both beautiful and practical during the world's active years. The silence here feels different from the outdoor spaces. It's the hushed quiet of a sacred place dedicated to knowledge and reflection. The archive's catalog system still functions perfectly, responding to my queries with holographic displays that list thousands of titles created by Eternia's players. The collection includes everything from epic fantasy novels that span multiple volumes to intimate poetry collections that reflect personal experiences within the virtual world. Many of these works draw inspiration from the author's adventures in Eternia, creating a unique form of meta-literature where fictional characters write about their own fictional reality. I selected a volume titled Chronicles of the Sunset Guild, written by a player known as Valorian the Chronicler. The book materializes in my hands with the weight and texture of a real tome, though its pages contain text that was never printed on physical paper. Reading through Valorian's account of his guild's adventures provides insight into the social dynamics that made virtual worlds so meaningful to their participants. The stories describe not just in-game achievements, but the friendships, rivalries, and collaborative problem-solving that characterized guild life. Moving deeper into the archive, I discover sections dedicated to different literary genres. There's an entire wing devoted to what players called philosophy of virtual existence, essays and treatises exploring questions about identity, reality, and meaning within digital spaces. These works represent some of the earliest serious thinking about how virtual worlds might affect human consciousness and social relationships. Reading them now, years after the worlds they describe have fallen silent, provides a poignant perspective on humanity's ongoing relationship with digital technology. The archive also contains more personal documents, player diaries, correspondence between friends, and reflective pieces about the experience of living partially in virtual space. These intimate writings offer glimpses into how individual players integrated their virtual experiences with their offline lives. Some describe virtual relationships that led to real-world marriages. Others explore how virtual achievements affected real-world confidence and self-perception. In a quiet corner of the archive, I find a section dedicated to memorial writings, tributes to players who passed away during Eternia's active years. These pieces, written by friends and guildmates, reveal the depth of relationships that could develop in virtual spaces. The tributes speak of shared adventures, mutual support during difficult times, and the unique form of presence that people could maintain with each other in digital environments. Reading these memorials reminds me that virtual worlds weren't just games. They were spaces where real human connections flourished. Preserving these literary works presents unique challenges that go beyond maintaining the technical infrastructure of virtual worlds. Each book in the archive contains not just text, but metadata about its author, publication date, reader reviews, and social connections to other works in the collection. This interconnected web of information creates a three-dimensional view of the cultural ecosystem that existed within Eternia's player community. As I conclude my documentation of the Archive of Echoes, uploading detailed catalogs and sample texts to the Heritage Foundation's databases, I'm struck by the realization that these virtual libraries may be some of the most complete records we have of early 21st century online community culture. Unlike social media posts or forum discussions that were often ephemeral, the books in Eternia's archives were created with permanence in mind. designed to be lasting contributions to a shared cultural space. Leading the archive of echoes, I follow a winding path that leads to one of Silverfall's most serene locations, the Memorial Gardens of Everlasting Bloom. This space was created by players as a place of quiet reflection and remembrance, designed with botanical algorithms that ensure the gardens remain in perfect condition regardless of season or weather patterns. The preservation protocols have maintained not just the visual beauty of these gardens, but also their intended atmosphere of peace and contemplation. The entrance to the gardens is marked by an archway covered in climbing vines that bloom with flowers in colors that shift subtly throughout the day. The gate responds to my approach, opening silently to reveal pathways that wind through carefully cultivated landscapes. Each section of the gardens was designed around a different theme. Some focus on specific color palettes. Others emphasize particular types of plants or growth patterns. The overall effect creates a sense of walking through a living artwork that changes subtly as you move through its spaces. What makes these gardens particularly special for preservation work is their integration of player-created memorial objects with the natural landscape design. Throughout the pathways, I encounter benches, sculptures, and planted areas that commemorate specific individuals or events from Eternia's community history. Each memorial includes metadata that tells its story, who it honors, when it was created, and often personal messages from the community members who contributed to its construction. The centerpiece of the gardens is the reflecting pool of shared memories, a large water feature surrounded by seating areas where players would gather for memorial services and remembrance ceremonies. The pool's surface shows no reflection in the traditional sense. Instead, it displays a gentle, ever-changing pattern of lights that represent the collective memories of the community. During Eternia's active years, players could contribute specific memories to this display, creating a communal reflection space that grew richer over time. As I walk the garden paths, documenting the various memorial installations, I'm accompanied by the gentle sounds of the artificial ecosystem that continues to thrive here. Digital birds sing from virtual trees, their songs following patterns that were programmed to create a sense of natural harmony. The sound of flowing water comes from streams that wind through the gardens, their courses designed to create optimal acoustic environments for quiet conversation and personal reflection. One of the most moving sections of the gardens is dedicated to players who used Eternia as a space for healing during difficult periods in their real lives. The community created this area as a refuge for members dealing with illness, loss, or other personal challenges. The plantings here emphasize flowers and trees that symbolize resilience and renewal across different Earth cultures. Walking through this section, I can access testimonials from community members about how virtual spaces provided comfort and connection during times when physical social interaction was difficult or impossible. The gardens also contain areas dedicated to celebrating positive community achievements, collaborative projects, successful guilds, and friendships that lasted throughout Eternia's active years. These celebratory spaces feature brighter colors and more dynamic landscape designs, creating visual and emotional contrast with the more contemplative memorial areas. The juxtaposition reminds visitors that virtual communities, like all human communities, encompass the full spectrum of human experience. My documentation work here involves not just cataloging the physical elements of the gardens, but also preserving the social and cultural context that gave them meaning. The neural interface allows me to access the complete history of each memorial installation. Who proposed it, how the community voted on its inclusion, what resources were required for its construction, and how it was integrated into the broader garden design. This information creates a detailed record of how virtual communities develop traditions and practices around memory and commemoration. As I near the completion of my documentation in the memorial gardens, I pause at a simple bench dedicated to all the friendships that bloomed in virtual soil and grew into real-world bonds. The inscription captures something essential about what made virtual worlds like Eternia meaningful to their participants. These weren't just entertainment platforms, they were social technologies that enabled new forms of human connection and community building. The preservation of spaces like these gardens represents one of the most important aspects of virtual heritage work. These environments demonstrate how human beings naturally create sacred spaces and meaningful rituals, even within entirely artificial contexts. They show how communities develop ways to honor their shared history and support members through both celebration and loss. In many ways, the memorial gardens of everlasting bloom represent humanity's adaptation of ancient social practices to new technological contexts. As my exploration of Silverfall draws toward its midpoint, I decide to visit one of Eternia's most technically sophisticated locations, the quantum resonance chamber that was built beneath the city by a guild of player programmers who specialized in pushing the boundaries of what was possible within the game's physics engine. The chamber represents the kind of collaborative innovation that emerged when creative players were given access to advanced world-building tools. Access to the chamber requires descending through a series of passages carved into the bedrock beneath Silverfall. The architecture here shifts from the ornate medieval fantasy style of the surface city to something more reminiscent of advanced scientific facilities. The walls are lined with crystalline formations that pulse with gentle patterns of light, creating an environment that feels both natural and highly technological. The preservation protocols have maintained not just the visual elements, but also the complex acoustic and electromagnetic effects that make this space unique. The quantum resonance chamber itself is a circular room about 50 meters in diameter, with walls that curve up to form a dome overhead. The surfaces are covered with intricate geometric patterns that were programmed to respond to sound, movement, and even the presence of visitors. As I enter the chamber, the patterns begin to shift and flow, creating mandalas of light that pulse in harmony with the gentle ambient tones that fill the space. During Eternia's active years, this chamber served multiple purposes for the player community. The guild that created it intended it primarily as a meditation space, where players could experience synesthetic combinations of light, sound, and gentle tactile feedback, generated by the game's advanced sensory systems. However, the chamber also became a venue for virtual concerts, poetry readings, and even wedding ceremonies. The acoustic properties were designed to create perfect sound distribution, ensuring that everyone in the chamber could hear clearly, regardless of their position. The technical achievement represented by this chamber is remarkable, even by 2035 standards. The player programmers who built it created their own extensions to Eternia's physics engine, developing algorithms that could generate real-time visual and auditory experiences based on the collective biometric data of everyone present in the space. When multiple players gathered here, their combined heartbeats, breathing patterns, and neural activity would influence the chamber's light and sound patterns, creating truly collaborative artistic experiences. My documentation of the chamber involves both aesthetic recording and technical analysis of the underlying code structures. The neural interface allows me to perceive not just what the chamber looks like and sounds like, but also to understand the mathematical relationships that govern its behavior. The algorithms running here represent some of the most sophisticated player-created content ever developed for a virtual world, complex enough that they continue to generate new patterns and experiences, even without human visitors to respond to. As I stand in the center of the chamber, allowing my own biometric data to influence its patterns, I experience something that feels like technological meditation. The gentle lights respond to my breathing, creating flowing mandalas that expand and contract in harmony with my respiratory rhythm. Soft tones emerge and blend based on my heart rate and neural activity, creating a personalized symphony that exists only in this moment. The experience demonstrates how virtual environments can create forms of beauty and transcendence that have no analog in physical space. The chamber also contains archived recordings of community events that took place here during Eternia's active years. Through the preservation system, I can access holographic recordings of concerts, where musicians from around the world perform together in this virtual space, their music enhanced and transformed by the chamber's reactive environment. I can witness recordings of meditation sessions, where dozens of players gather to experience collective consciousness in digital form, their combined biometric data creating unprecedented combinations of light and sound. One of the most fascinating aspects of the chamber is its integration of what players called emotional resonance algorithms. These systems were designed to detect and respond to the collective emotional state of gathered players, adjusting the environmental conditions to enhance feelings of peace, joy, or contemplative reflection. The algorithms were developed through months of experimentation and fine-tuning by the Guild, working with volunteer players to create an environment that could reliably induce positive emotional states. The preservation of the quantum resonance chamber presents unique challenges that highlight the cutting edge of virtual heritage work. Unlike static architectural features or text-based content, this space is fundamentally about dynamic, real-time experiences that emerge from the interaction between human consciousness and sophisticated algorithms. Maintaining its essence requires not just preserving the code and visual assets, but also understanding the philosophical and artistic intentions of its creators. My next destination takes me to the Hall of Democratic Voices, where Eternia's player-elected community council held their weekly meetings during the world's active years. This building represents one of the most sophisticated experiments in virtual governance ever attempted. A space where players developed systems for collective decision-making that influenced everything from world development to conflict resolution. The preservation of this space offers unique insights into how human societies adapt democratic principles to virtual environments. The hall itself was designed to embody the principles of open communication and inclusive participation. The main chamber features a circular seating arrangement where council members and community observers could interact as equals, with advanced audio systems that ensured every voice could be heard clearly regardless of the speaker's position. The architecture incorporates elements from various Earth traditions of democratic gathering spaces, creating an environment that feels both familiar and optimally functional for virtual meetings. As I enter the main chamber, I can access archived recordings of actual council sessions through the preservation system. These recordings provide fascinating documentation of how virtual communities develop governance structures and social norms. The discussions range from technical issues about game balance and world development to complex social questions about community standards and conflict resolution. Watching these recordings is like observing the evolution of a new form of human society in real time. The Council's record-keeping systems were remarkably sophisticated, maintaining detailed documentation of every proposal, debate, and decision made during Eternia's active years. The neural interface allows me to navigate through years of meeting minutes, policy documents, and community feedback that together create a comprehensive archive of democratic participation in virtual space. These records show how player communities could develop complex institutions for self-governance when given appropriate tools and frameworks. One of the most interesting aspects of Eternia's governance system was its integration of both traditional democratic processes and innovative approaches that were only possible in virtual environments. For example, the Council experimented with real-time polling systems that allowed community members to express their opinions on issues continuously rather than just during formal voting periods. They also developed conflict resolution procedures that used the virtual environment's capabilities to create safe spaces for mediation and negotiation. A hall contained smaller meeting rooms where council committees worked on specific issues, from technical development to community events to player support. Each room was designed with acoustic properties that ensured privacy while maintaining the transparent, open atmosphere that characterized the council's approach to governance. The preservation protocols have maintained not just the physical spaces, but also the collaborative tools and information systems that supported the Council's work. My documentation here focuses particularly on the innovative procedures that the Community Council developed for inclusive decision-making. Unlike many online communities that struggled with issues of representation and participation, Eternia's Council created systems that actively encouraged involvement from players across different demographics and playstyles. They developed methods for ensuring that both highly active and more casual players could meaningfully participate in governance processes. The Council's archives also contain detailed records of how they handled conflicts and disputes within the community. Rather than relying solely on administrative punishment, they developed restorative justice approaches that used the virtual environment's capabilities to create opportunities for dialogue and understanding between conflicting parties. These procedures often involved guided discussions in specially designed virtual spaces that promoted calm communication and empathetic listening. Reading through the Council's records reveals how virtual communities could achieve levels of democratic participation that are difficult to replicate in physical environments. The asynchronous nature of virtual interaction allowed for more thoughtful deliberation, while the game's social tools enabled new forms of community engagement and consensus building. The Council's success in maintaining community cohesion throughout Eternia's active years demonstrates the potential for virtual environments to serve as laboratories for democratic innovation. As I complete my documentation of the Hall of Democratic Voices, I'm struck by the sophistication of the governance systems that emerged organically from player communities. These weren't imposed structures, but evolved solutions that reflected the specific needs and capabilities of virtual social environments. The preservation of these systems and their records provides valuable insights for understanding how human societies might adapt to increasingly digital forms of social interaction. The Community Council's legacy extends beyond just the governance of one virtual world. Their innovations in digital democracy, conflict resolution, and community building represent early explorations of social technologies that may become increasingly relevant as human societies become more connected through digital networks. The archived records of their work serve as case studies for designing more effective and inclusive forms of online community organization. Moving away from the formal governance spaces, I venture into Silver Falls Artisan District, where the city's most creative players established workshops, galleries, and collaborative creative spaces. This area represents the flourishing of virtual artistic communities that emerged within Eternia's creative tools ecosystem. The district showcases how virtual environments can become platforms for entirely new forms of human creative expression. The Artisan District's layout reflects the organic growth of creative communities. Unlike the planned architecture of the governmental and residential areas, these streets developed gradually as artists claimed spaces and modified them according to their creative needs. The result is a neighborhood that feels both cohesive and wonderfully chaotic, with workshop spaces that blend into gallery areas and collaborative studios that spill out onto public plazas. Each workshop in the district tells the story of a particular creator or creative community. The preservation protocols have maintained not just the physical spaces, but also the creative works in progress, the tools and resources that artists used, and the collaborative networks that connected creators throughout Eternia's active years. Walking through these spaces is like exploring the studios of a massive, distributed art colony that existed entirely in virtual form. One of the most fascinating workshops belongs to a creator known as Lydia the Lightweaver, who specialized in developing new techniques for virtual sculpture using Eternia's advanced material physics engine. Her workshop contains dozens of works in various stages of completion, from simple light studies to complex installations that respond to viewer presence and movement. The preservation system has maintained the interactive elements of these pieces, allowing me to experience them as they were intended during the world's active years. The Lightweaver's techniques involve programming materials that could change their properties based on environmental conditions and observer interaction. Her sculptures exist in a constant state of gentle transformation, their colors, textures, and forms shifting according to algorithms that she developed through years of experimentation. Experiencing these works demonstrates how virtual environments enabled artistic expressions that have no equivalent in physical media. Adjacent to the Lightweaver's workshop is a collaborative space used by the Harmonious Building Guild, a group of musician players who developed techniques for creating architecture that generated music through its interaction with Eternia's environmental systems. Their workshop contains instruments and sound generation devices that were built into the virtual world's physics engine, creating musical experiences that emerged from the interaction between virtual wind patterns, structural resonance, and carefully programmed acoustic properties. The Guild's masterpiece, which I can still experience through the preservation system, is a tower that plays different musical compositions based on the weather, time of day, and season. The music isn't recorded or pre-composed. It emerges in real time from the interaction between the tower's architectural elements and the environmental conditions generated by Eternia's weather simulation systems. The result is a form of musical architecture that creates unique compositions continuously, a collaboration between human creativity and algorithmic generation. My documentation of the Artisan District involves cataloging not just the individual creative works, but also the collaborative networks and knowledge-sharing systems that made this creative community possible. The district includes educational spaces where experienced creators taught newcomers, critique circles where artists shared work and feedback, and experimental labs where groups collaborated on pushing the boundaries of what was possible within Eternia's creative tools. The district's gallery of evolving works showcases pieces that were designed to change and develop over time, even without direct creator intervention. These works represent explorations of what artists called living art, creative expressions that existed in dynamic relationship with their virtual environment and continued to evolve throughout Eternia's active years. Some pieces responded to visitor interactions. Others changed based on community events or global conditions within the virtual world. One particularly moving section of the district is dedicated to collaborative memorial art created by the community in response to real-world tragedies and losses. These works demonstrate how virtual creative communities could provide spaces for collective processing of grief and social trauma. The memorial installations combine individual creative contributions into larger collaborative works that honor shared experiences of loss, while affirming the power of creative community to provide comfort and meaning. The preservation of the artisan district presents unique challenges related to maintaining interactive and time-based artworks. Unlike static objects, many of the creative works here depend on dynamic systems and real-time generation algorithms. The Heritage Foundation's preservation protocols have been specially adapted to maintain these living artworks in their intended functional state, ensuring that future visitors can experience them as their creators designed them to be experienced. As my exploration of Silverfall continues, I make my way to the Learning Gardens, an educational district where Eternia's players created one of the most innovative virtual learning environments ever developed. This area demonstrates how virtual worlds could serve as platforms for peer-to-peer education and knowledge sharing that transcended the limitations of traditional educational institutions. The preservation of these spaces offers insights into the potential for virtual environments to revolutionize human learning and skill development. The Learning Gardens were designed around the principle that education works best when it feels like play and exploration rather than formal instruction. The district consists of numerous thematic areas, each dedicated to different fields of knowledge and skills. These range from practical skills like virtual architecture and programming to more abstract subjects like philosophy, history, and creative writing. The physical design of each learning area reflects its subject matter, creating immersive environments that enhance the educational experience. The Mathematics Grove exemplifies the innovative approach to virtual education that characterized the Learning Gardens. Instead of traditional classrooms, mathematical concepts are represented through interactive landscapes where learners can literally walk through geometric proofs, manipulate three-dimensional algebraic equations, and observe mathematical phenomena as they happen in real time. The preservation system maintains all of these interactive elements, allowing me to experience educational content that was simultaneously intellectually rigorous and playfully engaging. As I explore the Mathematics Grove, I can access archived records of learning sessions that took place here during Eternia's active years. These recordings show how players-turned-teachers developed innovative pedagogical approaches that took advantage of virtual environment capabilities. Complex mathematical concepts that are difficult to visualize in 2 dimensions become intuitive when learners can experience them as 3-dimensional, interactive phenomena. The history halls represent another remarkable achievement in virtual education. Here, learners could experience historical events through carefully researched virtual reconstructions that allowed them to walk through ancient cities, observe historical processes in action, and interact with AI representations of historical figures. The educational approach emphasized experiential learning and critical thinking rather than memorization, encouraging learners to draw their own conclusions from immersive historical evidence. One of the most sophisticated areas in the Learning Gardens is the Science Laboratory Complex, where players created working simulations of physical, chemical, and biological processes. These simulations allowed learners to conduct experiments that would be impossible or dangerous in physical environments, while still teaching accurate scientific principles. The preservation protocols have maintained the scientific accuracy of these simulations, ensuring that they continue to function as effective educational tools. My documentation work in the Learning Gardens involves cataloging not just the educational content, but also the peer-to-peer teaching networks that made this educational community possible. Eternia's players developed sophisticated systems for matching learners with mentors, creating study groups around shared interests, and recognizing educational achievements that motivated continued learning. These social systems were as important as the technological infrastructure in creating effective virtual learning environments. The Language Exchange Pavilion showcases how virtual environments can facilitate global language learning and cultural exchange. Players from around the world gathered here to practice languages through immersive role-playing scenarios, cultural simulations, and collaborative storytelling. The pavilion maintains archives of thousands of language learning sessions, demonstrating how virtual environments could break down geographical barriers to intercultural communication and understanding. The Philosophy Forum represents the more abstract end of the educational spectrum, providing spaces for contemplative discussion and exploration of fundamental questions about existence, ethics, and human nature. The design of these spaces emphasizes contemplation and respectful dialogue, with acoustic properties and environmental features that promote thoughtful conversation. The archived discussions from these forums provide fascinating insights into how virtual communities grappled with questions about the nature of reality and identity in digital spaces. The creative writing workshop areas demonstrate how virtual environments could enhance traditional educational activities. Writers could collaborate on stories set within Eternia itself, using the virtual world as both inspiration and setting for their creative work. The workshop spaces include tools for collaborative editing, peer review systems, and publication platforms that allowed student writers to share their work with the broader community. The preservation of the Learning Gardens represents one of the most complex challenges in virtual heritage work. These spaces weren't just repositories of information, but active learning communities where knowledge was created and shared through dynamic interactions between learners, teachers, and the virtual environment itself. Maintaining the educational effectiveness of these spaces requires preserving not just content, but also the social and technological systems that made collaborative learning possible. The Learning Gardens also demonstrate how virtual educational communities could address issues of accessibility and inclusion that challenge traditional educational institutions. Players with physical disabilities that limited their access to conventional educational settings could participate fully in virtual learning environments. Geographic isolation, economic constraints, and social barriers that prevent educational participation in physical environments could be overcome through virtual learning communities. Having explored the major districts and gathering spaces of Silverfall, I arrive at what was considered the heart of the city, the Central Synthesis Plaza, where different community groups would come together for major celebrations, announcements, and collective decision-making events. This space was designed to accommodate thousands of simultaneous participants, while maintaining an intimate atmosphere that encouraged meaningful interaction and shared experience. The plaza's design reflects sophisticated understanding of crowd dynamics and social psychology in virtual environments. The space is organized in concentric circles, with different zones optimized for different types of interaction, from intimate small group conversations to large-scale performances and presentations. The acoustic design ensures that speakers in the central area can be heard clearly throughout the plaza, while still allowing for side conversations and smaller gatherings around the periphery. Standing in the center of this vast empty space, I'm struck by the profound silence that has replaced what was once the bustling social hub of a massive virtual community. During Eternia's active years, this plaza would regularly host events with thousands of participants, guild celebrations, virtual concerts, philosophical debates, and community-wide discussions about the world's development and governance. The preservation protocols have maintained the infrastructure for all of these activities, but the absence of the human communities that gave this space its meaning creates a poignant reminder of what has been lost. The plaza's memorial installations commemorate some of the most significant community events in Eternia's history. These include celebrations of major collaborative achievements, memorial services for community members who passed away, and gatherings that brought together players from around the world to address global crises or celebrate human achievements. The archived recordings of these events provide extraordinary documentation of how virtual communities could create meaningful shared experiences that connected people across vast geographical distances. My documentation work here involves not just cataloging the physical features of the plaza, but also analyzing the social technologies that made large-scale virtual gatherings successful. Eternia's developers and player communities created sophisticated tools for managing crowd dynamics, facilitating meaningful participation in large groups, and maintaining the technical stability necessary to support thousands of simultaneous participants. These innovations represent early explorations of technologies that may become increasingly important as human social interaction becomes more digitally mediated. The plaza also serves as a symbol of what made virtual worlds like Eternia meaningful to their participants. Unlike modern social media platforms that often create isolation despite connection, virtual worlds provided spaces for genuine community formation and shared experience. The Central Synthesis Plaza exemplified this potential, serving as a gathering place where people could experience collective identity and mutual support that transcended their individual circumstances. As I prepare to conclude my exploration of Silverfall and transition to other areas of Eternia, I take time to reflect on what the preservation of these community spaces means for understanding human social development. The virtual communities that flourished in Eternia and similar worlds represented early experiments in digitally mediated social organization that offer valuable insights for designing more effective and inclusive forms of online community. The empty plaza also raises important questions about the sustainability of virtual communities and the factors that led to their eventual dissolution. Eternia's closure wasn't due to technical failures or lack of interest. It resulted from economic and corporate decisions that were largely beyond the control of the communities that called the virtual world home. The preservation project represents an attempt to maintain the cultural and social value of these spaces even after their original commercial context has disappeared. From the plaza's elevated observation deck, I can see the full scope of Silverfall spread out below me, a testament to human creativity, collaboration, and the desire to build beautiful spaces for shared experience. The city represents thousands of hours of individual and collective effort by people who came together from around the world to create something magnificent. The fact that these contributions have been preserved for future generations demonstrates the growing recognition that virtual spaces can have lasting cultural and historical value. As the digital day progresses toward evening in Eternia's time cycle, the plaza's lighting systems begin their automated transition to night mode, casting warm pools of light across the empty gathering spaces. The sight is both beautiful and melancholy, a reminder that the technological systems that supported these communities continue to function perfectly, even in the absence of the human communities they were designed to serve. Leaving the urban sophistication of Silverfall behind, I venture into Eternia's borderlands, the vast wilderness areas that stretched between major player settlements and provided spaces for exploration, resource gathering, and solitary contemplation. These regions represent a different aspect of virtual world design, focused on providing experiences of natural beauty and peaceful exploration rather than intensive social interaction. The transition from city to wilderness is gradual and thoughtfully designed. Silverfall's outermost districts fade into suburban areas with larger lots and more natural landscaping, which in turn give way to rural settlements where individual players built private retreats and experimental structures. Finally, the developed areas yield to pristine wilderness that stretches to the horizon, broken only by occasional roads and the scattered remnants of player expeditions. The borderlands were designed using advanced procedural generation algorithms that created landscapes with the complexity and beauty of natural environments, while maintaining the internal consistency necessary for a functional virtual world. The result is terrain that feels genuinely wild and unpredictable, while still providing the navigation and resource features that players needed for their virtual adventures. Walking through these areas, even years after the world's closure, I'm constantly amazed by the level of detail and the sense of authentic natural environment that the developers achieved. My first major destination in the Borderlands is the Crystal Caverns of Endless Echoes, a vast underground complex that was discovered by player explorers early in Eternia's active years. The caverns represent the kind of hidden wonder that made virtual worlds so compelling for exploration-minded players. The entrance is concealed behind a waterfall in a remote valley, accessible only to those who had discovered the location through careful exploration or community knowledge sharing. Descending into the caverns is like entering an underground cathedral of light and sound. The walls are lined with crystalline formations that were programmed to respond to sound and movement, creating interactive light displays that change as I move through the passages. The acoustic properties of the caverns create natural echo effects that were beloved by player musicians who would come here to perform for the unique acoustic environment. The deepest chambers of the Crystal Caverns contain some of Eternia's most sophisticated environmental art installations. These were collaborative works created by both the game's original developers and player communities, featuring interactive ecosystems that existed solely for their aesthetic and contemplative value. Bioluminescent organisms cycle through gentle patterns of color and movement, creating living mandalas that serve no functional purpose beyond their beauty. The preservation of these wild spaces presents unique challenges different from those involved in maintaining player-built areas. The Borderlands rely heavily on dynamic environmental systems, weather patterns, seasonal changes, ecosystem interactions, and geological processes that continue to function even without player presence. Maintaining these systems requires preserving not just static environmental assets, but also the complex algorithms that generate realistic, natural phenomena. As I explore deeper into the wilderness, I encounter the Singing Forest, a region where the trees were programmed with acoustic properties that create natural music when the wind passes through their leaves. The effect was discovered accidentally during the world's development, but was preserved and enhanced because of its extraordinary beauty. Standing in clearings within the Singing Forest, surrounded by the gentle harmonies created by algorithmic wind and programmed acoustics, provides one of the most peaceful experiences available in the preserved virtual world. The forest also contains the ruins of ancient civilizations that were built into Eternia's backstory by the original developers. These ruins serve as reminders that virtual worlds often contained layers of fictional history that provided context and depth for player experiences. The preservation protocols maintain not just the physical structures of these ruins, but also the lore databases and contextual information that explained their significance within Eternia's fictional universe. My documentation work in the Borderlands involves mapping and cataloging the various natural phenomena and hidden locations that made these areas special for explorers. Unlike the densely documented player settlements, much of the Borderlands content was discovered organically through exploration and shared through informal community networks. The Preservation Project represents the first comprehensive survey of these wild spaces and their hidden treasures. The Borderlands also contain evidence of more solitary player activities, the remote cabins and private retreats where individual players created personal spaces away from the social intensity of major settlements. These structures provide insight into how virtual worlds could serve as spaces for personal reflection and individual creativity. Many of these remote builds showcase experimental architecture and artistic expression that wasn't constrained by community consensus or collaborative requirements. One of the most poignant discoveries in the Borderlands is the Memorial Grove, a forest clearing where the community created an informal memorial space for players who had passed away. Unlike the formal memorial installations in Silverfall, this space evolved organically as individual community members planted virtual trees and created small shrines to honor departed friends. The grove represents the natural human tendency to create sacred spaces and rituals for processing loss, adapted to virtual environments. My exploration of Eternia's wilderness areas leads me to one of the virtual world's most spectacular natural features, the Ocean of Infinite Tides. A vast body of water that stretched beyond the horizon and contained its own complex ecosystem of islands, underwater cities, and marine life. The ocean represents some of the most advanced environmental simulation ever created for a virtual world, with realistic ocean physics, weather patterns, and biological systems that continue to function independently of player interaction. Approaching the ocean from the coastal cliffs near the Borderlands, I'm immediately struck by the scale and realism of the virtual seascape. The water simulation includes accurate wave patterns, tidal cycles, and weather effects that create a convincing marine environment. The preservation protocols have maintained all of these dynamic systems, ensuring that the ocean continues its eternal patterns of tide and storm, even without the fishing fleets and exploration vessels that once traveled its waters. The coastline itself tells stories of the maritime communities that flourished during Eternia's active years. Small fishing villages dot the shoreline, their harbors still containing the virtual boats and equipment that players used for oceanic exploration and resource gathering. These settlements represent a different style of virtual living from the grand cities and formal organizations. Smaller, more intimate communities focused on particular activities and lifestyles. To properly explore the ocean areas, I activate the neural interface's aquatic adaptation protocols, allowing my virtual form to move naturally through underwater environments. Diving beneath the surface reveals the ocean's most spectacular features: vast coral reefs, underwater mountain ranges, and the ruins of ancient civilizations that were built into the seabed as part of Eternia's deep lore. The underwater environment includes realistic lighting effects, with sunlight filtering down through the water in ways that create genuinely magical underwater landscapes. The Great Reef of Perpetual Bloom represents one of the ocean's most remarkable features, a massive coral formation that was programmed with advanced biological simulation algorithms to create a functioning underwater ecosystem. The reef teems with virtual marine life that follows realistic behavioral patterns, from tiny fish that school in complex formations to larger predators that maintain the ecological balance of the virtual ecosystem. The preservation protocols ensure that this underwater ecosystem continues to function as a complete biological simulation. Swimming through the reef areas, I encounter the abandoned underwater cities built by player communities who specialized in marine exploration and aquatic living. These settlements showcase innovative approaches to underwater architecture, with buildings designed to work with ocean currents and pressure systems rather than against them. The cities include air-filled chambers where players could gather for social activities, as well as specialized facilities for underwater crafting and resource processing. The deepest parts of the ocean contain some of Eternia's most mysterious and beautiful locations, underwater valleys illuminated by bioluminescent organisms, thermal vents that create unique microenvironments, and deep-sea plains where the virtual world's geology created landscapes of surreal beauty. These areas were rarely visited during the world's active years, making them feel like genuine frontiers of discovery, even for preservationist documentation work. My exploration of the ocean areas also reveals evidence of some of Eternia's most ambitious collaborative projects. The Underwater Transit Network was a player-built system of tunnels and transport stations that connected distant parts of the ocean, allowing for rapid travel between underwater settlements and surface ports. The engineering complexity of this project demonstrates the sophisticated planning and coordination capabilities that virtual communities could achieve when working toward shared goals. The ocean preservation presents some of the most technically challenging aspects of the Virtual Heritage Project. The marine environments rely on complex physics simulations for water movement, pressure effects, and light transmission that must be maintained in real time to preserve the authentic underwater experience. The biological simulations of marine ecosystems require ongoing computational resources to maintain the behavioral patterns and population dynamics that create convincing virtual sea life. One of the most moving discoveries in the ocean areas is the Memorial Reef, where the community created an underwater equivalent to the various land-based memorial spaces. This reef was specifically designed as a place where players could release virtual marine life in honor of departed community members, creating a living memorial that became part of the ocean's ongoing ecosystem. The preservation protocols have maintained this memorial ecosystem, allowing the commemorative marine life to continue their behavioral patterns as a living tribute to the community's deceased members. The documentation of ocean areas requires specialized techniques for navigating and recording three-dimensional underwater environments. The neural interfaces cartographic systems must account for vertical movement and complex terrain features that exist at multiple depth levels. The resulting maps and recordings provide comprehensive documentation of virtual underwater spaces that were among the most technically sophisticated environments ever created for virtual worlds. As I surface from the deepest parts of the ocean exploration, floating peacefully in the warm virtual waters, while the digital stars begin to appear in Eternia's sky, I'm reminded of the extraordinary achievement represented by these simulated environments. The ocean of infinite tides demonstrates how virtual worlds could create experiences of natural beauty and environmental immersion that approached and sometimes exceeded what was possible in physical environments. My oceanic exploration leads me to one of Eternia's most fantastical regions, the floating islands of Serenity, an archipelago of landmasses that defied conventional physics by hovering above the ocean's surface. These islands represent the kind of impossible beauty that virtual worlds could create, combining realistic environmental simulation with fantastical elements that could only exist in digital space. The islands were designed as spaces for contemplation and artistic expression, away from the practical concerns of resource gathering and community building. The approach to the floating islands requires using the flight capabilities that were available to experienced players in Eternia. The neural interface's movement systems allow me to rise from the ocean surface and soar through the air toward the nearest island cluster. The sensation of virtual flight remains one of the most profound experiences available in preserved virtual worlds. The freedom of three-dimensional movement through spaces designed for aerial navigation creates a form of embodied experience that has no equivalent in physical reality. The islands themselves hover at various altitudes, connected by bridges of crystallized air and platforms that were programmed to respond to visitor presence. The largest island in the cluster, known as the Sanctuary of Peaceful Thoughts, was designed as a retreat space where players could escape from the social intensity of major settlements and engage in solitary activities like meditation, artistic creation, and philosophical reflection. The architecture of the floating islands emphasizes openness and connection with the sky. Buildings are constructed with transparent materials and open designs that blur the boundaries between interior and exterior space. The island surfaces are covered with gardens that were programmed to respond to the presence of visitors, blooming more vibrantly when someone spends time among the plants. These responsive gardens created a sense of connection between player consciousness and virtual environment that many visitors found deeply meaningful. My documentation of the floating islands involves cataloging not just the physical structures, but also the artistic installations and contemplative spaces that made these areas special for solitary visitors. Each island contains unique features designed to inspire reflection and creative expression. Meditation pavilions with acoustic properties optimized for contemplative silence, art studios equipped with advanced virtual creative tools, and observation decks positioned to provide spectacular views of the ocean and sky. The Island of Eternal Sunset showcases one of Eternia's most sophisticated environmental art installations. The island's position and atmospheric conditions were programmed to create a perpetual sunset effect, with the sky cycling through spectacular color displays that never repeated exactly. The gentle, ever-changing light provided an ideal environment for contemplative activities and became a favored destination for players seeking peaceful experiences. The preservation of the floating islands required maintaining the complex physics simulations that kept the land masses suspended in air, while still providing realistic environmental effects, like weather and plant growth. The island's impossible physics were integrated seamlessly with more conventional environmental systems, creating spaces that felt both fantastical and naturally convincing. This integration represents some of the most sophisticated world-building ever achieved in virtual environments. The islands also contain the Archives of Solitary Wisdom, a library space where individual players contributed personal reflections, philosophical writings, and artistic works created during their time in the contemplative island environments. These archives provide unique insight into the personal experiences of virtual world participants and the ways that digital environments could facilitate introspection and personal growth. One of the most remarkable features of the floating islands is the cloud garden, where virtual plant life was programmed to grow in and around the moisture-rich atmosphere surrounding the floating land masses. These aerial gardens created three-dimensional landscapes that existed entirely in the air, with root systems that drew nutrients from clouds and atmospheric moisture. Walking through the cloud garden requires careful navigation through air currents and floating root systems that create a maze-like environment of incredible beauty. The island's resident AI entities represent some of the most sophisticated artificial intelligence characters ever created for virtual worlds. These entities were designed to serve as contemplative companions for visiting players, offering philosophical dialogue and gentle guidance for reflective activities. The preservation protocols have maintained these AI characters in their fully functional state, allowing me to interact with artificial beings that were designed to facilitate meaningful conversation about existence, creativity, and the nature of virtual experience. My exploration of the floating islands concludes at the Temple of Virtual Transcendence, a structure that was built collaboratively by players who were interested in exploring the spiritual and philosophical implications of virtual existence. The temple combines architectural elements from various Earth religious traditions with fantastical design features that could only exist in digital space. The approach to the temporal gardens requires passing through a transition zone where the normal flow of Eternia's time cycle gradually shifts to accommodate the experimental temporal effects within the gardens themselves. The neural interface includes specialized protocols for managing temporal perception changes, ensuring that consciousness can adapt smoothly to modified time flow without experiencing disorientation or discomfort. The gardens consist of multiple regions, each designed around different temporal concepts. The acceleration groves allow visitors to experience rapid changes in plant growth, seasonal cycles, and environmental development, compressing months or years of natural change into minutes of observation time. These areas provided educational opportunities for understanding long-term ecological processes and also created visually spectacular experiences of time-lapse natural phenomena. In contrast, the deceleration meadows slow temporal perception to allow detailed observation of normally rapid processes. The movement of individual water droplets in rainfall, the precise mechanics of insect flight, or the subtle changes in light quality as virtual suns move across the sky. These slowed time environments created opportunities for meditation and contemplative observation that were impossible in normal time flow. The most sophisticated area within the temporal gardens is the cyclical sanctuary, where time was programmed to flow in repeating loops of various lengths. Visitors could experience the same natural events repeatedly, but from different perspectives or with different levels of attention, creating opportunities for understanding the cyclical nature of natural processes and the subjective nature of temporal experience. My documentation of the temporal gardens involves not just cataloging the various temporal effects, but also understanding the philosophical and educational purposes that these experiments served. The gardens were designed by player philosophers working with the development team to create spaces for exploring questions about consciousness, memory, and the nature of temporal experience. The preserved gardens continue to function as intended, providing access to forms of temporal experience that have no equivalent in physical reality. The garden areas also contain the Laboratory of Temporal Perception, where visitors could participate in experiments designed to understand how consciousness adapts to modified time flow. These experiments were conducted with full participant consent and provided valuable research data about human temporal perception that had implications beyond virtual world design. The preservation protocols have maintained the laboratory equipment and research databases, creating an archive of early research into consciousness and time perception in virtual environments. One of the most moving areas within the temporal gardens is the Memorial Cycleway, where community members created repeating temporal loops to commemorate significant events in Eternia's history. These loops allow visitors to repeatedly experience moments of community celebration, achievement, or remembrance, creating a form of temporal monument that preserves specific experiences rather than just static memorials. The preservation of temporal effects presents unique challenges for virtual heritage work. The modified time flow areas require specialized computational resources to maintain their temporal distortion effects while ensuring compatibility with normal time flow areas elsewhere in the preserved world. The Heritage Foundation's technical teams had to develop new preservation protocols specifically for these temporally complex environments. The temporal gardens also demonstrate how virtual worlds could serve as laboratories for exploring fundamental questions about human consciousness and perception. The ability to modify temporal experience in controlled ways provided research opportunities that were impossible in physical environments. The archived research data from the gardens contributes to ongoing scientific understanding of consciousness and temporal perception. My exploration of the gardens concludes in the Observatory of Infinite Moments, where the temporal effects were calibrated to create experiences of subjective timelessness. In this space, visitors could experience what phenomenologists call eternal now consciousness, awareness that exists outside of normal temporal progression. The observatory was designed for deep contemplative practices and provided many visitors with profound experiences of expanded consciousness. The temporal gardens represent one of the most ambitious experiments in virtual environment design ever attempted. The successful creation of spaces with modified temporal perception demonstrates the potential for virtual worlds to provide experiences that expand human consciousness beyond the constraints of physical reality. The preservation of these gardens ensures that future researchers can study the effects of temporal manipulation on consciousness and continue the philosophical investigations that began during Eternia's active years. As I prepare to leave the temporal gardens and return to normal time flow, I experience the gentle transition back to conventional temporal perception. The neural interface manages this shift smoothly, allowing consciousness to readjust gradually to normal time passage. The experience reminds me that virtual environments can offer forms of consciousness expansion that may become increasingly important as human society becomes more comfortable with technologically mediated experience. Departing the temporal complexity of the gardens, I descend into one of Eternia's most mysterious and technically sophisticated regions, the crystal caverns of resonant memory. These underground chambers represent an experimental implementation of what the developers called environmental memory storage, where the virtual environment itself could record and replay experiences that occurred within specific locations. The caverns serve as a living archive of significant events from Eternia's community history. The entrance to the caverns lies hidden beneath a mountainous region several hours' travel from the major settlements. The concealed location was intentional. The developers wanted these memory storage areas to be discovered organically by dedicated explorers rather than overwhelmed by casual visitors. The preservation protocols have maintained not just the caverns themselves, but also the subtle environmental clues that guide visitors toward the hidden entrance. As I descend into the cavern system, the walls begin to exhibit the characteristic resonant crystal formations that give this area its name. These crystals were programmed with advanced data storage capabilities that could capture and preserve complete sensory records of events that occurred in their vicinity. The preservation system has maintained the functionality of these memory storage systems, allowing access to thousands of archived experiences from Eternia's active years. The main chamber of the caverns contains the central memory matrix, a massive crystalline formation that served as the primary storage hub for the environmental memory system. The matrix responds to visitor presence by displaying visual echoes of past events, holographic recordings of community gatherings, personal conversations, creative collaborations, and quiet moments of individual reflection that were captured by the cavern's memory storage systems. Interacting with the memory crystals provides access to what might be the most comprehensive archive of virtual community life ever preserved. Unlike traditional recordings that capture events from fixed perspectives, the crystal memory system recorded experiences from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, creating three-dimensional archives that can be experienced from any angle or perspective. This technology allowed for preservation of social interactions in their full complexity and context. My documentation work in the caverns involves cataloging and analyzing the thousands of memory recordings stored within the crystal formations. These archives provide unprecedented insight into the daily life, social dynamics, and cultural development of Eternia's player communities. The recordings include everything from guild meetings and community celebrations to intimate conversations between friends and quiet moments of personal achievement. One of the most valuable aspects of the crystal archives is their preservation of communication patterns and social interaction styles that characterized virtual community life. The recordings show how players developed unique forms of social expression that combined elements of face-to-face interaction, online communication, and the specific possibilities created by virtual embodiment. These interaction patterns represent early explorations of social technologies that may become more widespread as human communication becomes increasingly digitally mediated. The caverns also contain specialized memory chambers that were programmed to preserve specific types of experiences. The Chamber of Creative Genesis contains recordings of artistic and creative processes, showing how virtual tools and collaborative possibilities influenced creative expression. The Hall of Problem-Solving Wisdom preserves recordings of community discussions where complex challenges were addressed through collective intelligence and collaborative decision-making. Perhaps the most moving section of the caverns is the Memorial Chamber of Final Farewells, where the memory storage systems captured the farewell gatherings and departure ceremonies that occurred during Eternia's final months. These recordings document how the community processed the knowledge that their virtual world would soon be closed, showing both the grief of anticipated loss and the determination to preserve meaningful connections beyond the virtual environment. The preservation of the crystal memory systems required developing new archival techniques specifically for three-dimensional, multi-perspective recordings. The Heritage Foundation's technical teams had to create translation protocols that could maintain the full experiential quality of the crystal recordings, while making them accessible through modern neural interface technology. The resulting archive represents one of the most sophisticated collections of preserved virtual experiences ever assembled. The crystal caverns also demonstrate how virtual environments could serve as collective memory systems for communities. Unlike individual memory, which is subjective and potentially unreliable, the environmental memory storage created objective records of community experiences that could be accessed and shared by all community members. This technology provided new possibilities for maintaining community history and cultural continuity. My exploration of the deepest cavern chambers reveals the archive of unspoken moments, where the memory storage systems captured subtle experiences that participants might not have consciously noticed. The emotional atmosphere of gatherings, the non-verbal communication patterns that developed within virtual communities, and the gradual changes in community culture that occurred over time. These recordings provide insight into the unconscious social dynamics that influenced virtual community development. The crystal caverns of resonant memory represent a unique achievement in virtual world design, the creation of spaces that could serve as both active environments and comprehensive archives of the experiences that occurred within them. The preservation of these caverns ensures that future researchers will have access to detailed records of how human communities adapted to virtual environments and developed new forms of social organization within digital spaces. My underground exploration of the memory caverns leads me back to the surface and toward one of Eternia's most inspiring locations, the Observatory of Infinite Skies, a mountaintop facility where player astronomers created one of the most sophisticated virtual sky simulation ever developed. The observatory represents the intersection of scientific education, artistic vision, and community collaboration that characterize the best of virtual world culture. The journey to the observatory requires ascending through mountain regions that showcase Eternia's advanced terrain generation systems. The hiking paths wind through realistic alpine environments with weather patterns, vegetation zones, and geological features that mirror the complexity of physical mountain ecosystems. The preservation protocols have maintained all of these environmental systems, ensuring that the approach to the observatory provides the same sense of gradual ascent and growing anticipation that visitors experienced during the world's active years. The observatory complex itself represents remarkable collaborative achievement between Eternia's development team and player communities interested in astronomy and space science. The facility includes multiple telescope installations, planetarium chambers, and research laboratories where virtual astronomers could conduct observations of Eternia's simulated sky and collaborate on educational projects related to real-world astronomy. The centerpiece of the observatory is the Grand Celestial Theater, a dome-shaped chamber where visitors could experience immersive presentations about astronomical phenomena. The theater's projection systems were capable of displaying accurate simulations of celestial events from throughout the universe, allowing visitors to witness supernovas, black hole formations, and galactic collisions from perspectives that would be impossible for human observers in physical reality. My documentation of the observatory involves cataloging not just the astronomical equipment and educational facilities, but also the collaborative research projects that emerged from the intersection of virtual world technology and scientific education. Player astronomers used the observatory's resources to create educational content that was distributed throughout Eternia's learning networks, making advanced astronomical concepts accessible to community members with diverse educational backgrounds. The observatory's Sky Archive contains recordings of special celestial events that were programmed to occur within Eternia's virtual sky. Meteor showers, planetary alignments, solar eclipses, and aurora displays that followed realistic astronomical patterns, all being enhanced for optimal visual impact. These events became focal points for community gatherings where players would come together to witness and celebrate the beauty of simulated cosmic phenomena. One of the most sophisticated features of the observatory is the temporal telescope array, which allowed visitors to observe Eternia's sky at different timescales and from different perspectives. The telescopes could show accelerated views of stellar evolution, compressed time-lapse recordings of galactic rotation, and detailed observations of planetary systems that were modeled on real astronomical data. These tools provided educational experiences that compressed millions of years of cosmic history into comprehensible timeframes. The observatory also served as a space for philosophical contemplation about humanity's place in the universe. The contemplation chambers were designed with advanced acoustic and visual systems that created environments optimized for reflective thinking about cosmic scales and universal phenomena. Many visitors reported profound experiences of cosmic perspective and existential insight during their time in these chambers. The preservation of the observatory's astronomical systems required maintaining the complex mathematical models and simulation algorithms that generated realistic celestial phenomena. The Heritage Foundation's preservation protocols ensure that the virtual sky continues to follow accurate astronomical patterns, while maintaining the enhanced visual effects that made celestial events particularly spectacular for virtual world visitors. My exploration of the observatory includes access to the archived records of the Virtual Astronomy Guild, a community organization that coordinated educational activities and collaborative research projects. The Guild's archives document how virtual communities could organize around shared intellectual interests and create sophisticated educational networks that complemented and enhanced formal educational institutions. The observatory's research laboratory contains virtual instruments and analytical tools that were used by player researchers to conduct observations and analysis of celestial phenomena. While the observations were of simulated, rather than real celestial objects, the analytical methods and collaborative research processes mirrored those used in real astronomical research, providing valuable educational experiences for participants interested in scientific careers. The Observatory of Infinite Skies also demonstrates how virtual environments could serve as democratic platforms for scientific education. Unlike physical observatories that require expensive equipment and specialized training, the virtual observatory provided access to advanced astronomical tools and phenomena for anyone with access to Eternia. This democratization of scientific exploration allowed for broader participation in astronomical education and research. As I conclude my documentation of the observatory, standing on the highest observation deck as Eternia's virtual night sky displays its programmed constellation patterns, I'm reminded of the extraordinary educational potential that virtual worlds represented. The observatory provided experiences of cosmic wonder and scientific insight that were accessible to global communities regardless of their geographic location or economic circumstances. The preservation of the Observatory of Infinite Skies ensures that future educators and researchers will have access to one of the most sophisticated virtual science education facilities ever created. The observatory's combination of accurate scientific modeling, enhanced visual presentation, and collaborative learning tools provides a template for how virtual environments might continue to serve educational purposes in an increasingly digital future. As my exploration of Eternia's educational and contemplative spaces continues, I venture toward one of the virtual world's most innovative environmental features, the Gardens of Algorithmic Growth, where the development team experimented with advanced procedural generation systems that could create evolving landscapes and ecosystems. These gardens represent cutting-edge research into how virtual environments could generate realistic natural complexity that continued to develop and change over time. The gardens occupy a vast valley system that was initially seeded with basic environmental parameters and allowed to develop through algorithmic processes that simulated natural ecological development. Over the years of Eternia's active period, the gardens evolved into complex ecosystems with plant and animal communities that followed realistic biological principles while creating unique combinations of species and environmental conditions that could only exist in virtual space. Approaching the gardens requires passing through a transition zone where the standard Eternia environment gradually gives way to the more experimental procedural generation systems. The change is subtle at first. Slightly different plant species, unusual color variations in flowers and foliage, and animal behaviors that seem more complex and varied than in other areas of the virtual world. The preservation protocols have maintained all of these dynamic systems, ensuring that the gardens continue their evolutionary development, even in the absence of human observers. The entry point to the gardens is marked by the Archive of Algorithmic Documentation, a research facility where the development team and player researchers collaborated to study and document the procedural generation processes that drove the garden's evolution. The archive contains detailed records of how the various algorithms interacted to create realistic ecological relationships between virtual species and environmental conditions. My documentation work in the gardens involves not just cataloging the current state of the algorithmic ecosystems, but also understanding the processes that created them and continue to drive their development. The neural interface provides access to real-time visualizations of the algorithmic processes at work, showing how virtual plants compete for resources, how predator-prey relationships maintain population balances, and how environmental changes trigger adaptive responses in virtual species. The gardens are divided into several experimental zones, each designed to test different aspects of procedural ecosystem generation. The evolutionary nursery showcases how virtual species can develop new characteristics over time through algorithmic processes that simulate natural selection and genetic variation. Observing these virtual evolution processes provides insights into biological principles, while demonstrating the potential for virtual environments to serve as laboratories for ecological research. The symbiosis sector demonstrates how virtual species can develop mutually beneficial relationships that emerge from algorithmic interactions rather than being explicitly programmed. Virtual plants and animals in this area have evolved complex interdependencies that mirror the relationships found in natural ecosystems, creating a convincing simulation of ecological complexity that continues to develop new patterns over time. One of the most remarkable areas within the gardens is the adaptation arena, where virtual species face environmental challenges that trigger rapid evolutionary responses. The algorithmic systems can compress evolutionary timescales, allowing observers to witness adaptive changes that would take centuries or millennia in natural environments. These accelerated evolution demonstrations provide educational insights into biological principles, while showcasing the potential for virtual environments to serve as tools for scientific modeling and research. The preservation of the algorithmic gardens required developing specialized protocols for maintaining dynamic systems that depend on continuous computational processes. Unlike static environmental features, the garden's evolutionary systems require ongoing calculation and data processing to maintain their realistic biological behaviors. The Heritage Foundation's preservation infrastructure includes dedicated computational resources for supporting these dynamic ecosystems. My exploration of the gardens includes access to the Ecological Monitoring Station, where researchers tracked the long-term development of the algorithmic ecosystems and documented unexpected emergent behaviors that arose from the interaction of different procedural generation systems. The monitoring data provides a unique record of how virtual ecosystems can develop complexity and stability over time when given appropriate algorithmic foundations. The gardens also contain educational installations where visitors could interact with the procedural generation systems directly, adjusting environmental parameters and observing how changes affected the development of virtual ecosystems. These interactive demonstrations provided hands-on learning experiences about ecological principles and the relationship between environmental conditions and biological diversity. The Community Research Collaborative within the gardens facilitated partnerships between Eternia's player communities and real-world research institutions studying ecology and evolutionary biology. The virtual ecosystems provided controlled environments for testing ecological theories and modeling complex biological relationships that were difficult to study in natural environments. The archived research data from these collaborations represents valuable contributions to scientific understanding of ecological principles. The gardens of algorithmic growth demonstrate how virtual worlds could serve as platforms for serious scientific research while providing educational and aesthetic experiences for broader communities. The combination of rigorous algorithmic modeling with engaging visual presentation created environments that were simultaneously scientifically valuable and publicly accessible. As I conclude my documentation of the algorithmic gardens, observing virtual butterflies whose wing patterns evolved through procedural generation systems, and listening to bird songs that emerge from algorithmic composition processes, I'm reminded of the extraordinary potential for virtual environments to serve as tools for both scientific advancement and public education about natural processes. As my comprehensive exploration of Eternia nears completion, I visit one of the virtual world's most joyful and community-focused areas, the festival grounds of eternal celebration, where the player community created spaces for ongoing cultural events, artistic performances, and social celebrations. These grounds represent the pinnacle of virtual community culture, showcasing how digital environments could serve as platforms for human creativity, artistic expression, and collective joy. The festival grounds occupy a vast area designed to accommodate multiple simultaneous events, while maintaining intimate atmospheres for individual gatherings. The layout includes performance stages of various sizes, art installation spaces, craft demonstration areas, and social gathering zones, connected by pleasant walking paths that wind through landscaped areas optimized for community interaction and cultural exchange. Approaching the festival grounds, I can see evidence of the ongoing automated systems that maintained celebratory atmospheres even after the cessation of active community events. Decorative lighting systems continue their program cycles, creating gentle illumination patterns that shift throughout Eternia's day-night cycle. Musical installations still respond to environmental conditions, generating ambient soundscapes that provide appropriate acoustic backgrounds for different areas of the grounds. The main celebration amphitheater represents one of the most sophisticated virtual performance venues ever created. The acoustic design ensures perfect sound distribution throughout the seating area while providing performers with natural amplification that enhances rather than distorts vocal and instrumental performance. The preservation protocols have maintained the amphitheater's advanced audio systems, allowing me to experience the acoustic properties that made this venue special for virtual world musicians and performers. My documentation of the festival grounds involves cataloging not just the physical infrastructure, but also the archived records of the thousands of community events that took place here during Eternia's active years. The event archives include recordings of concerts, theatrical performances, poetry readings, art exhibitions, and cultural celebrations that brought together participants from around the world in shared appreciation of human creativity and artistic expression. The Artisan Marketplace showcases the sophisticated virtual economy that developed around creative goods and services within Eternia's community. The market stalls still contain examples of virtual crafts, artwork, and decorative items that were created and traded by community members. These virtual goods represent a unique form of digital folk art that emerged from the intersection of gaming culture, artistic expression, and virtual world technology. The Cultural Exchange Pavilion demonstrates how virtual communities could facilitate intercultural dialogue and learning. The pavilion includes spaces designed around different Earth cultural traditions, allowing community members to share aspects of their heritage while learning about other cultures through immersive virtual experiences. The archived cultural exchange events show how virtual worlds could serve as platforms for global cultural understanding and appreciation. One of the most moving areas within the festival grounds is the memorial performance space. The interactive art installation areas showcase some of the most innovative virtual artworks ever created, pieces that responded to visitor presence and interaction to create unique aesthetic experiences. These installations demonstrate how virtual environments could enable new forms of artistic expression that combined visual art, music, and interactive technology. The preservation systems maintain the interactive capabilities of these artworks, allowing continued access to their intended aesthetic experiences. My exploration of the festival grounds includes access to the Community Archive Center, where volunteer historians from the player community maintained detailed records of cultural events, artistic achievements, and social traditions that developed within Eternia's virtual society. These community-maintained archives provide invaluable documentation of how virtual communities create and maintain cultural traditions and social institutions. The festival grounds also contain the Global Collaboration Studios, where artists from different continents work together on virtual art projects that would have been impossible without virtual world technology. The archived collaboration projects demonstrate how virtual environments could eliminate geographic barriers to artistic collaboration while creating new possibilities for shared creative expression. The wedding garden within the festival grounds preserves the spaces where community members held virtual marriage ceremonies that often preceded or accompanied real-world partnerships. The garden's design emphasizes natural beauty and romantic atmosphere, with landscape features and architectural elements that created perfect settings for celebrating committed relationships within the virtual community. As I conclude my documentation of the festival grounds of eternal celebration, walking through areas where thousands of community members once gathered to share art, music, and joyful social experience, I'm reminded of the extraordinary human capacity for creating culture and meaning within any environment that provides appropriate tools and social structures. The preserved festival grounds serve as monuments to the creative potential of virtual communities and the human drive to celebrate life through artistic expression and shared experience. As my journey through Eternia approaches its conclusion, I make my way to one of the virtual world's most contemplative and profound locations, the quiet library of digital souls, a vast repository where the community preserved the digital traces and personal archives of players who had been significant contributors to the virtual world's culture and development. This library represents perhaps the most poignant aspect of virtual heritage preservation. The attempt to maintain some essence of the human presences that gave these digital spaces their meaning and vitality. The library building itself was designed to embody the solemnity and reverence appropriate for a space dedicated to memory and commemoration. The architecture draws inspiration from great libraries throughout human history, while incorporating design elements that could only exist in virtual space. Impossible geometries that create spaces larger than their apparent dimensions. Lighting that responds to the emotional content of archived materials, and acoustic properties that create perfect silence or gentle ambiance as appropriate for different types of contemplation. Entering the library's main hall, I'm struck by the profound quiet that permeates this space. Unlike the bustling social energy that characterized most of Eternia's community areas, the library was designed for individual reflection and careful study of preserved digital legacies. The silence here feels sacred, a digital equivalent to the hushed reverence found in memorial spaces and places of worship in the physical world. The library's collection system organizes preserved materials according to both traditional archival principles and innovative approaches developed specifically for virtual heritage preservation. Each individual's digital legacy includes not just their creative works and contributions to community projects, but also behavioral pattern analyses, social network maps, and environmental interaction records that together create comprehensive portraits of their virtual world presence and influence. My documentation work in the library involves examining the innovative methods that the community developed for preserving digital personhood and virtual identity. These preservation techniques went beyond simple data storage to capture the subtle qualities that made each community member's virtual presence unique. Their communication patterns, creative preferences, social interaction styles, and the distinctive ways they navigated and influenced virtual spaces. The personal archive chambers contain the most intimate aspects of individual digital legacies: private journals, personal creative works, correspondence with friends, and reflective writings about the experience of virtual world participation. Access to these materials requires special permissions and protocols that respect the privacy intentions of the original creators while preserving their contributions for historical understanding. One of the most sophisticated areas within the library is the interaction echo chamber, where advanced analysis systems preserved records of how individual community members influenced and were influenced by their social networks within the virtual world. These interaction patterns reveal the complex web of relationships and mutual influences that shaped community culture and individual identity within virtual environments. The Creative Legacy Archive preserves the artistic and creative contributions that community members made to Eternia's cultural development. This collection includes not just finished artworks and completed projects, but also creative process documentation, collaborative creation records, and the evolution of artistic ideas over time. The archive demonstrates how virtual environments could serve as incubators for creative development and artistic collaboration. The community leadership documentation preserves detailed records of individuals who played significant roles in virtual world governance, community organization, and social development. These records include not just formal leadership activities, but also informal influence patterns and the subtle ways that certain community members shaped social norms and cultural development through their example and participation. Perhaps the most moving section of the library is the Memorial Garden of Virtual Presence, where the community created spaces dedicated to preserving the essence of departed members' virtual world contributions. These memorials go beyond traditional commemoration to create interactive experiences that allow visitors to understand and appreciate the unique qualities that each individual brought to the virtual community. The preservation of digital souls and virtual identity represents one of the most philosophically complex challenges in virtual heritage work. The library's preservation protocols attempt to maintain not just data about individuals, but some sense of their virtual presence and influence that made them meaningful to their communities. This work raises profound questions about the nature of identity, memory, and legacy in digital environments. The Neural Pattern Archive contains records of how individual consciousness interacted with virtual environment systems, preserving patterns of attention, preference, and behavioral response that characterized each person's unique approach to virtual world participation. These neural interaction patterns provide insight into how human consciousness adapts to virtual environments and how virtual experiences influence cognitive and emotional development. My exploration of the library includes access to the Collective Memory Integration System, where individual digital legacies are analyzed in relation to broader community patterns and cultural development. This system reveals how individual contributions influenced collective community evolution, and how community culture shaped individual virtual identity development over time. The library also contains the Wisdom Synthesis Archive, where community members' insights, philosophical reflections, and learning experiences are preserved for their potential value to future virtual communities. These archives represent attempts to maintain the accumulated wisdom and social learning that emerged from virtual world participation and community development. As I conclude my documentation of the quiet library of digital souls, sitting in contemplation among the preserved traces of thousands of virtual world participants, I am reminded of the profound human connections and personal significance that virtual communities could create. The library serves as a monument to the reality that virtual worlds were never just technological achievements, but social and cultural spaces where real human lives unfolded and left lasting impacts on others. As dawn begins to break in the physical world beyond the preservation facility, my night-long journey through Eternia Online draws to its peaceful conclusion. I find myself back at the Whispering Overlook, where this exploration began, but now carrying within my consciousness the accumulated weight and wonder of an entire virtual civilization. The gentle morning light, filtering through the facility's environmental systems, mirrors the soft illumination that Eternia's dual suns cast across the empty landscape, creating a poignant symmetry between the digital and physical worlds. The comprehensive documentation I've gathered tonight represents more than just an archive of virtual spaces and digital artifacts. It constitutes a record of human creativity, collaboration, and community building that emerged when people from around the globe were given the tools and freedom to create shared spaces for meaning and connection. Every building I've explored, every garden I've walked through, every memorial I've documented tells the story of human beings adapting to new forms of social and creative possibility. The implications of what I've witnessed extend far beyond the boundaries of gaming or entertainment technology. Eternia Online and similar virtual worlds represented early experiments in digitally mediated society that offer valuable insights for humanity's increasingly digital future. The governance systems developed by the Community Council, the educational innovations of the Learning Gardens, the artistic collaborations in the Artisan District, and the contemplative practices that emerged in spaces like the Temporal Gardens all demonstrate human potential for creating meaningful institutions and practices within virtual environments. The preservation of these digital spaces serves multiple purposes that become more significant as time passes since Eternia's closure. For researchers studying virtual communities and digital sociology, the preserved world provides unprecedented access to a complete virtual society with all its institutions, cultural artifacts, and social relationships intact. For educators interested in virtual learning environments, Eternia's educational spaces offer templates for creating immersive, collaborative learning experiences that transcend the limitations of traditional classroom settings. Perhaps most importantly, the preserved virtual world serves as a monument to the human capacity for creating beauty, meaning, and community within any environment that provides appropriate tools and social frameworks. The artistic installations, memorial spaces, and collaborative projects documented throughout Eternia demonstrate that human creativity and social connection can flourish even in entirely artificial contexts, suggesting optimistic possibilities for humanity's adaptation to increasingly technological futures. The technical achievements represented by Eternia's preservation, also point toward new possibilities for cultural heritage work and historical documentation. The ability to maintain complete virtual environments with all their dynamic systems, interactive elements, and social spaces functioning creates opportunities for preserving aspects of human culture and community life that traditional archival methods cannot capture. Future historians studying early 21st century online communities will have access to immersive records of virtual social life that provide unprecedented insight into how human societies adapted to digital technologies. My work as a virtual heritage preservationist has shown me that the closure of virtual worlds like Eternia doesn't represent the end of their cultural significance, but rather their transformation from active communities to preserved heritage sites. The empty spaces I've explored tonight continue to tell their stories and offer their insights to anyone willing to spend time within their digital boundaries. The silence that now fills these virtual spaces is not the silence of death, but the silence of patient preservation, waiting for future generations to discover and learn from the extraordinary human achievements they contain. The gentle rhythms of wind through Eternia's virtual forests, the soft lighting of its preserved cities, and the continuing cycles of its environmental systems create a meditation on permanence and change that feels especially poignant in the quiet hours before dawn. These digital spaces persist in perfect stasis, unmarked by the physical decay that affects material heritage sites, yet changed fundamentally by the absence of the human communities that gave them life and meaning. As I prepare to disconnect from the neural interface and return to physical awareness, I'm filled with gratitude for the opportunity to witness and document these remarkable achievements in virtual world design and community building. The preservation of Eternia Online ensures that future generations will be able to study, learn from, and perhaps even find inspiration in the virtual civilization that once flourished within these digital boundaries. The story of Eternia Online is ultimately a story about human potential, the potential for creativity, collaboration, and community that emerges when people are given appropriate tools and spaces for shared endeavor. The virtual world's preserved spaces serve as testimony to the reality that meaningful human culture can develop within any context that supports communication, creativity, and mutual support. Tonight's exploration has reminded me why this preservation work matters so deeply. Virtual worlds like Eternia represent some of humanity's most ambitious collaborative achievements, bringing together millions of people across geographic, cultural, and economic boundaries to create shared spaces of extraordinary beauty and sophistication. Their preservation ensures that the lessons learned, the innovations developed, and the community wisdom accumulated within these digital spaces remains available for future generations to study and build upon. As the neural interface gently disconnects and I return to full awareness of the preservation facility around me, I carry with me the profound peace that always follows these deep explorations of preserved virtual worlds. The work of documenting and maintaining these digital heritage sites is more than just technological preservation. It's a form of meditation on human creativity, community, and the endless capacity for finding meaning and beauty in whatever spaces we inhabit. The empty servers will continue their gentle humming throughout the coming day, maintaining perfect digital ecosystems and complete virtual civilizations for whatever future visitors may come seeking to understand how human communities flourished in the early days of virtual world technology. In the meantime, these preserved spaces rest in patient readiness, holding their stories and wisdom in digital amber, waiting for the next consciousness to walk their empty paths and witness the extraordinary achievements they represent. If you found this journey through the digital archaeology of virtual heritage preservation meaningful, I invite you to share your thoughts about virtual communities, digital preservation, or your own experiences with online worlds in the comments below. What aspects of virtual world culture do you think are most important to preserve for future generations? How might the lessons learned from early virtual communities inform our approach to increasingly digital forms of social interaction? Consider subscribing for more explorations of preserved virtual worlds and the ongoing work of digital heritage preservation. The Virtual Heritage Foundation maintains archives of dozens of significant virtual worlds, each with their own unique contributions to our understanding of digital community and human adaptation to virtual environments. Rest well, and may your dreams be filled with the peaceful beauty of digital worlds where human creativity knew no bounds.